it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Really.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Because we could have had a Guillermo del Toro creepy, menacing Hobbit, which would have been
True,
so
because he loves
dope.
real effects. Like, that's his thing, man. And yeah, like the one with what's the name of the guy who plays the sheriff in Stranger Things?
Oh god, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but I know
but
who you're talking
when
about.
he ended up playing Hellboy, like I was like, it is a good visual fit, and that's it. Like,
Totally agree.
Ron Perlman. If you look at Ron Perlman's face, he looks like Hellboy painted skin tone.
It's true.
You know what I'm saying?
I totally agree. And whatever, it is what it is. And I think Guillermo del Toro has done some really, really good stuff since. I can't remember what was the name of that one. Did you ever see it? It was from like 2 or 3 years ago. It was the like something alley.
No,
It was about like a circus, and it was all the circus freaks and stuff.
No, but that sounds cool.
It was really Nightmare Alley.
Oh yeah. I saw the trailer, but I never watched it.
You should watch it. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not his best work in my opinion, but it's still very solid.
What do you think is his best work?
I mean,
Most people say Pan's Labyrinth.
It's got to be Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
It's got to be. And have you seen it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like the whole story is beautiful. It's a masterpiece of filmmaking, but like if nothing else, one of the singular most remembered items in my history of watching movies, and I've watched hundreds if not thousands of movies, is when she goes into that room where there's the demon monster with all the food, and he's got his hands on the table and she's told don't eat the food, and then she eats a grape, and then he pulls up his hands to his face and his eyeballs are in his palms and he holds it up, and then oh my god, one of the creepiest freaking characters. It gave me chills when I watched it and scared the hell out of me, and to this day one of the most memorable scenes in all of cinema. It's just so good.
He seems like a real fan too, which is what I love about him.
Totally. Yeah. And I like people that have like real strong vision, and not just when it comes to like, well, I really want it to the camera to move this way, but people that are like lost in their imagination. And that's what Guillermo del Toro reminds me of. Somebody who's just lost in their own imagination,
which I
in
love.
the best way.
I absolutely love that.
You know? But, well, anyways, we should get going here.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, welcome to The Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, hanging out in person with Akiva Miola.
What's up, y'all?
Always stoked to do that. And we're going to try to get moving pretty quick here because there's a lot to cover today. As y'all have been listening to the series, you know that we've been trying to wrap this up in 10 parts, and I'm going to. So I've had to write the last few episodes a little bit longer because there's a good amount of information. And today especially, we're going to be getting into something I've been building up to, and it's a really important piece to cover. So again, lots of stuff to cover. So just a couple things I want to shout out really quickly. First and foremost, we're taking a quick break after this episode. The holidays are coming up, so we're just going to take an extra week or two. I think we're scheduled to have part 9 of Mark Twain come out early in the new year. So we're just taking a couple weeks off to be with our family, take a breather, relax a little bit, all that good stuff. Hopefully y'all can forgive us. But that means we have decided, actually, because we've heard from a lot of you, you keep hearing from past series that we had mentioned the Queen Victoria series. And we've gotten a lot of emails from a lot of listeners saying, what happened? Where is it? Where can I find it? So long story short, everybody, it was the second series we ever did for the biographers, and it was really long. It was 8 parts, and each of those 8 parts was 2 hours long, so 16 hours of content.
Yeah.
And really all that happened was we just kind of thought, man, this is really long, and for any new listeners that are coming in to listen to the show, we're kind of afraid this is going to scare them off from what we traditionally are trying to aim for. Mm-hmm. So we just made the decision to take it down in hopes that it wouldn't scare folks off. But seems like our listeners are kind of saying, no, we don't care. Long is cool.
Yeah. Also, like, I think this wasn't my series. This was back when Aubrey was still co-host. Yeah. But I will say, I think we need to give the audience a little bit more credit. We have a really smart audience. I feel like both of us have kind of had a bit of an unwritten rule, which is politics tends to not make great biographies because it's very stuffy and there's so much context required. And if you listen to the Queen Victoria series, you'll see what we're talking about. But for those of you who love to nerd out about the Whigs and the Tories and how the political scene was during the Victorian era, I think that's definitely a good listen and a great way to keep you busy while we take our little break.
Exactly. So for anybody that's going to be starved for content, we know the holidays are not a joyous time for every single person. There have been many times in my life where I just didn't enjoy the season.
Real.
So if anybody is just going like, no, don't go because I want stuff to listen to and keep me sane during this time, hopefully 16 hours of Queen Victoria content will keep you nice and happy and fed over the few weeks that
when you're in the back in the garage, smoking weed with your cousins because you can't stand your parents anymore, you can just put this in your headphones, tune out.
Yeah.
So we'll be with you the whole time.
Yeah. Or if you just don't even celebrate at all and you just are like, this isn't my thing, there you go. Maybe you get some content to listen to. Now, I will say, though, everybody, that is going to be exclusively on YouTube. So if you're looking for it on Spotify or something, it's not going to be there. It's just going to be weird for the feed, so to speak.
Yeah, because we kind of like reorganized everything.
Exactly. So it is exclusively going to be on YouTube. You'll have to listen to it there. Apologies if that's inconvenient. That's just sort of how we're going to do it. So want to let y'all all know that up front. And then last couple of things, as always, if y'all are enjoying the show, and hey, it's the holiday season. If you're feeling generous, please support our show. You can just do so by going to patreon.com/thebiographers. Throw us a couple dollars. And then also, if you're feeling generous and you want to give us a nice review, I actually just saw today we got a couple more reviews come in as well, and they're starting to stack up. And it's lovely hearing from y'all and seeing what you have to say. So we'd appreciate that as well. All right, well, let's get going here into Mark Twain Part 8, believe it or not. Sound good?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. Now, last time, we saw Sam Clemens and his family finally move into their dream home a few years before Mark Twain would put the finishing touches on the adventures of Tom Sawyer. The book was not a smash hit, so Sam decided to focus on various investments and business dealings, all of which ended up being money pits rather than profitable endeavors. Eventually, the Clemens family headed for Europe for an extended vacation to help churn up inspiration for new writing projects, and the trip yielded a new travel book called A Tramp Abroad. The trip also sparked another idea for a book, and not long after the family arrived back in the US, Sam finished The Prince and the Pauper. But once again, sales were poor. But where we left off last time, Sam had done some soul searching and decided to reconnect with his youth by taking a riverboat journey up and down the Mississippi River and stopping in his hometown of Hannibal, Missouri. Once again, he had fallen in love with life on the river. Now, before we really get going, in the last episode, I mentioned that Sam always had a temper, and I wanted to quickly provide an example of how it would often manifest. So one morning, as he tried to find a pair of shorts to wear, he found that, 3 in a row, his shorts were missing a button. After the third pair, he lost it. He began shouting a massive string of obscenities and literally threw his shorts out the window.
Just like into the river.
Just like, ah! And like, this is in Hartford at his like mansion house.
Oh, gotcha,
right? So he's
gotcha.
throwing them
That's
literally out of his window. Okay. Then he looked over his shoulder and noticed that the bathroom door, where he was cracked open. Livy was on the other side in their bedroom. He gulped, then tried to sneak out of the bathroom, but Livy was sitting on the bed and staring silently at him. He would write, quote, "Against the white pillows, I saw that young and beautiful face, and I saw the gracious eyes with something else in them which I had never seen there before. They were snapping and flashing with indignation. I felt myself shrinking away to nothing under the accusing gaze. Then my wife's lips parted, and from them issued my latest bathroom remarks. The language perfect, but the expression velvety, unpractical, apprentice-like, comically inadequate, absurdly weak and unsuited to the great language." Then Livy said, quote, "There, now you know how it sounds." Sam then wrote, quote, "Then I exploded. The air was filled with my fragments and you could hear them whiz. I said, 'Oh, Livy, if it sounds like that, God forgive me, I will never do it again.' Then she laughed to herself. Both of us broke up into convulsions and went on laughing until we were physically exhausted and spiritually reconciled."
That's sweet.
So, by all accounts, he got mad, yes. But it was more at himself than everybody else. It seems like. Anyways.
Seems like a grump. Not necessarily, yeah.
Exactly. Now, I know there might be some people out there that are going, hey, my parent or whomever was somewhere along those lines and it was still scary. I hear you. I'm not trying to mitigate when people are angry around you and that it doesn't hurt or whatever. But I am just trying to give you one example of Mark Twain, and sort of it seemed mostly to be relatively comical in sort of like a, oh, grandpa's mad because he read the newspaper again kind of a way, rather than like, I'm actually mad at life.
Yes.
Is what it kind of feels like to me, but just wanted to put that out there.
He also seems like the type of person that like you would think it's funny if they were mad. I get this a lot. Like when, like if we're like playing games, me, Shalena, a couple of other pals, if we're playing games and we make Shalena mad, that's not funny. We have to stop playing the game. But if Akiva's mad, everybody's laughing. And I feel like Mark Twain is kind of a similar.
Yeah, and I would almost imagine, I don't know for a fact because we don't have any recordings or anything, but I would imagine that if you've ever heard the comedian Louis Black, his whole act is that he's just mad and yelling at you about things.
Yes.
And it's funny. Him being mad is funny by itself.
Bill Burr, you know.
Exactly. So I don't know if that's necessarily 100% the truth, but that's the impression I get from Mark Twain when he would get mad. So now it's 1882. Sam is 46 years old, going on 47, and absolutely teeming with romantic inspiration after his trip through the South. Throughout the year, his new book called Life on the Mississippi was his main focus, which would serve as one part memoir and one part travel book. The final stretch of writing was a bit of a slog, with the main problem being that he had written pretty much everything he wanted to, but he was short on page count, so he had to dig deep to find more. The book would read almost like the Mississippi River itself, long and meandering, but with an undeniable sense of charm and mystique. Now, I personally think that one of the only pitfalls of Mark Twain's writing is that his works were often longer than they should have been, because he needed to meet a certain page count, but you can all be the judge of that yourself.
That's actually pretty common, too. If you've ever read Jules Verne, he kind of had the same contract. Yes. And if you read a Jules Verne novel, you're like, this is cool, and also 3 times too long.
Exactly. And I think oftentimes if I had a complaint about Mark Twain, that is what it would be. Now, he eventually got it finished in January of 1883, having high hopes that its sales would be hefty. But his own dubious notion that he was a genius-level businessman got in his way, as he insisted on having control over the advertising and selling process. Upon its release in May of 1883, newspaper critics were generally favorable, but once again, Mark Twain was simply ahead of his time, and nobody could yet fully appreciate the nuanced and innovative book they had just read. Initially, the book sold 30,000 copies. Not bad, but not great. Sam blamed his publisher for mishandling the book's sales, apparently forgetting that he insisted on having final say on how it was all handled.
And he's like, yeah, man, whatever you say.
But regardless, Life on the Mississippi is now considered one of Mark Twain's best works. Now, once the book was published, Sam took a break, sort of. He wrote to a friend at the time saying, quote, "I have been an utterly free person for a month or two. I do not believe I ever so greatly appreciated and enjoyed the absence of the chains of slavery as I do this time. I have nothing to do. I belong to nobody. But of course, the highest pleasure to be got out of freedom is labor. Therefore, I labor.
I know exactly what that's like.
I do too.
If anybody has been on unemployment before, you know exactly what this is like. You're like,
Yes.
I'm free. This is terrible.
Yes, and I have to do things. I can't just sit around. And by labor, he meant things like bad stock investing, nonsense writing, sketching out an idea for the Statue of Liberty, construction of which had just broken ground.
Huh.
Pretty interesting. And a game that would teach children about history, so just kinds of random things. But mainly, despite claiming to be free of writing, he was spending his leisure time finishing up the follow-up to Tom Sawyer, which at this point had been 7 years in the making. But this felt different for him. With this project, he fell in love with writing again. He wrote at the time, quote, "I haven't had such booming work days for years. I'm piling up manuscript in a really astonishing way. This summer, it is no more trouble to me to write than it is to lie." Now, all of his previous books had been personal to him, sure, but this one was especially personal. He wanted to write something that was wholeheartedly Southern, like he was, but from the viewpoint of someone wholeheartedly Northern, like he now was. Maybe most importantly, he wanted to tell a story that would challenge Americans and expose them to something they had never seen before, even if it was ugly, drawing upon all of his previous experiences from his Southern upbringing that in many ways still haunted him. Amazingly, by September 1st of 1883, he was writing to his publishers that he had finished his latest work. He'd written 695 pages in just 6 weeks.
I don't understand. Was he on cocaine? Probably. It's the 1800s.
No. His whole thing was he would just cram himself into a room with a box of cigars, ink and paper, and that's what he would do for 12 hours straight.
That's crazy.
He would just sit there and smoke cigars and write.
That kind of reminds me of a story with Guns N' Roses. They had a similar situation. They were in LA, and their producer had kept on asking them to finish an album. And in order to do so, the producer locked them in the hotel room and would not allow them to leave until they had the album finished. So then these like rock stars were practically like starving, like living off of like pizza and beer, trying to get, finish it so that they could leave.
Pizza and beer, among other things.
Among other things.
They got to stay skinny somehow.
It's true.
But the Mississippi River had worked its magic, and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was now complete. But as he went through the editing process, another idea began to grow, pushing his now good friend, Ulysses S. Grant, to write and publish his memoirs. But the even bigger idea was achieving publishing freedom by owning his own publishing house. This would allow him to not only publish his own books and therefore make more money, but also publish the works of other authors and make money off of them. So in May of 1884, it happened. He founded a publishing house called Charles L. Webster and Company of New York, named after Charles L. Webster, who was married to his niece and would serve as his right-hand man. But then, in June of 1884, Ulysses S. Grant would enter his kitchen, bite into a peach, and scream at the top of his lungs.
What?
What? You laugh. He would soon learn that he had cancer of the throat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, to be fair, you set me up for something funny. Biting into a peach and then screaming at the top of your lungs.
I was trying to be dramatic. Apparently, it came off as comic.
No. Okay, when's the last time you walked into a kitchen when... Like that's... Okay, fine. He's got cancer. We're sad.
Yes, it is sad. It's Ulysses Grant. Anyway,
yes. I know. I know.
We're not laughing at cancer people. We're laughing at ourselves, laughing about something we shouldn't be laughing about.
We do this all the time. I can't remember what series it was. I tried to lay down something so depressing, and you were like, "That's hilarious," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess when you."
Wasn't it like Da Vinci or something?
I can't remember.
I remember what that moment, but I don't remember what it was about. Anyways.
This happens all the time when you're writing. You're like, this is sad. And then we're like, oh no, this is actually hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay. Ulysses S. Grant, unfortunately, has cancer of the mouth or
throat cancer, which he was, a big smoker and stuff too.
Yeah.
So, but go figure. And he was also an insane drunk. He drank so much whiskey.
Yeah. That'll do it.
Yep. Now, given that he was growing increasingly penniless, this is Ulysses S. Grant, the idea of publishing a memoir so that he at least had something to leave to his wife was becoming more appealing. But first things first, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was set to be published in Canada and England in December of 1884, then in the US in February of 1885. The efforts of his own publishing house actually worked this time, selling 30,000 copies upon initial release and over 55,000 copies in the first year. The impact of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn would be long-lasting both in terms of cultural impact and sales, with 20 million copies sold by 1990.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Now, for anyone out there who has not read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, you absolutely should, or at least listen to the audiobook. I think we were both talking. You said it's on Audible for free. Yep. It's also on Spotify for free. Check it out. Mm-hmm. But even if you have, I'm going to give you a little refresher because it is really important. Now, the book starts out not long after the conclusion of Tom Sawyer. Huck has been taken in by the widow Douglas and her sister, Miss Watson. But soon, Huck's good-for-nothing, abusive alcoholic of a father comes a-knockin', asking for money. He eventually kidnaps Huck and keeps him in a tiny cabin across the river. Huck then cooks up a plan to escape by faking his own death. He shoots a wild boar, drags its bloody carcass through the tiny cabin to the edge of the river before sinking the hog with stones, and thus making everyone believe the house had been robbed and that Huck had been murdered. Kind of a smart plan, actually.
Yeah, actually.
Huck then sets off down the river and lands on an island, only to discover that he is not alone. Also on the island is a runaway slave named Jim. Now, Huck actually knew Jim quite well, as the widow Douglas and Miss Watson were Jim's owners, but Jim had run away after overhearing that Miss Watson was planning on selling him in the Deep South. Initially, Huck is conflicted about what to do with Jim. At first, he reflects on what he has been taught all of his life, that slaves were the property of someone else, so how would he like it if his own property ran away? Huck wondered, if he did not turn Jim in, was he committing a crime? And would God disapprove? But then he starts to think about his own freedom, and that really Jim was just trying to do exactly what Huck himself was currently trying to do, run away from an abductor in search of freedom. So Huck decides the two should stick together, and down the river they go, both literally and metaphorically. Now, on the surface, Jim almost appears at first to be a caricature of black stereotypes akin to blackface performances of the 1930s or 40s, but the further you read, the deeper and more real his character becomes. The poet Langston Hughes would later say of Jim, quote, "This is the first time we've had a realistic depiction of an unlettered slave clinging to the hope of freedom." And yes, everyone, the N-word is used throughout the book, which modern sentiments obviously condemn, but most scholars argue that it was used on purpose. Mark Twain biographer Ron Chernow, I think I'm saying your name right, Ron, has said, quote, "The N-word is in Huck Finn many times, but the N-word is used to expose the racism, not to celebrate it." Prominent writer, comedian, and civil rights activist Dick Gregory would say of Mark Twain and the use of the N-word in Huck Finn, quote, "Here's a man that came out and put a face on black folks. The N-word, up until he came along, meant a non-person, a product, somebody else's goods. No one ever had to listen to a conversation from a black person, and so Mark Twain was able to come through and say, here's N-word Jim, here's a story. And he took that black person and made them a human being." Now, throughout the book, we learn that Jim is not a caricature, but three-dimensional. He's spiritual, tender-hearted, loyal, and wise, but also cautious, scared, and superstitious. He has principles and morals, and even scolds Huck at one point for playing a prank on him, saying how much it hurt him, to which Huck actually apologizes. Jim even tells Huck that he's his best friend. At several points in the story, Huck talks about hearing Jim at night, crying alone, and talking to himself about how much he misses his wife and children. If you think back to the story of Marianne Cord, this is almost definitely in direct reference.
Yeah.
Jocelyn Chadwick, a PhD of literature and Mark Twain scholar, illuminates this moment perfectly when she said, quote, Huck says some of the most significant words I think I've ever read in fiction. He says, quote, I guess Jim misses his family the same way white folks do theirn. It don't seem natural, but I guess it's so. Jim's a man. Jim's a person. He's not 3/5 a person. He's not invisible. He's a dad, a father, a husband. He's a real individual. And Huck is not making a racist statement. He's unlearning literally. We actually hear him making those connections in his head. Through all of these experiences and adventures, Huck slowly begins to see Jim as a fellow human being, not a piece of property, ultimately realizing that Jim is a true friend and someone that he cares for deeply. Now, as the story continues on, it exposes more ideas of the Old South's many moral contradictions, and through these experiences, Huck's sense of right and wrong continue to evolve, and he starts to cast off the bonds of his imposed beliefs. Eventually, Huck and Jim pick up two con men on the run named King and Duke, who later betray them by abducting Jim to sell him. Huck is then faced with his ultimate dilemma. Throughout his time with Jim, Huck has been wrestling with the notion that he is committing a sin in the eyes of God by not turning Jim in, wondering if his actions will tip the scales towards his eternal damnation in hell. After Jim is captured, Huck sits alone, debating on what to do. He initially writes a note to be sent back to Miss Watson, Jim's legal owner, telling her where she can find him. Huck knows this will result in Jim being sold, but in his mind, he figures this is what God would want and that it'll get him into heaven. But then he starts to think of all that he and Jim have been through together, and that really, truly, Jim is his friend, and he loves him. Then in the crescendo of the entire story, Huck rips up the letter to Miss Watson and defiantly proclaims, quote, all right then, I'll go to hell. Now, of this moment, writer David Bradley put it best by saying, quote, the moment when Huck says, I'll go to hell, it's a challenging moment because he thought that was true. It wasn't a figurative statement at all, and it comes after he said some other things about maybe if I'd been trained, maybe if I've gone to Sunday school, maybe if I'd learned right, then I wouldn't do this, but I can't help myself. I'm evil. I'll go to hell to save my friend. That's what it all comes down to, isn't it? Deciding not to do what we think is going to save us, but doing what we think will save someone else. In essence, Huck, via Mark Twain, was saying, if my choice is going to heaven by embracing racism, or going to hell by rejecting it, I'm going to hell. So cool.
Absolutely beautiful. It kind of reminds me of this old sort of Jewish, I don't know, a thought experiment of the idea that heaven and hell are the same places, where you're in a scenario where you cannot feed yourself and you live forever. And when you're in hell, obviously, that is absolutely terrible. You literally cannot feed yourself. You're starving permanently. But when you're in heaven, you've already earned going to heaven, and you know that you have the capability to feed another person, and then another person can feed you. And it's this idea of self-sacrifice being the actual form of altruism, and not, and that is what results in a enlightened state of being, as opposed to you do good things, you get a prize. You know, if you've already living in a godly way, if you're already living in a good way, that becomes heaven in and of itself. Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful.
That's cool.
I love that. Wow. Incredible. Oh, and by the way, fantastic job recapping the story.
Thanks. This took me, I wanted to paint a good picture. I told you throughout several points in this whole series that I was like, when we get to Huck Finn, we're going to be spending 20 minutes at least talking about Huck Finn because it's so significant and important to world literature, culture, everything. Yeah. It's a really big deal.
And exactly like you said, the decision of saying, all right, I'll go to hell. And the fact that that was his genuine thought and feeling, because for the last, how old is he? 16-ish?
Huck Finn?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe 15, something like that, 14, 15.
Yeah. For the last 14, 15 years of his life, he was taught not as a thought process or an experiment, but in a very literal Southern way, he is going to experience the wrath of hell. And still making that decision for Jim is profound.
Yeah. And great thing to call out too. Two really important things to remember here is, if anybody remembers to the even very first episode of this entire series, we talked about him going to church as a little boy, Mark Twain, and hearing the preacher use the Bible to justify slavery in a pre-Civil War America, and why God said this was all okay. So quite literally, Mark Twain was raised in an environment that said God approves of slavery. It's good and right. If you reject it, you're actually sinning. So it's very, on the nose here, him writing this, right? And then it's also really important to remember that still in this current climate, right? We're in 1885, the overwhelming majority, especially of white America, is at the very least vaguely Christian, right? And there's a lot of different sort of denominations of Christianity now, and we've talked about them a little bit throughout the series. Yeah. But this was still at a point where, like, now in modern times, there are people that, modern Christian theologians that debate if heaven and hell is even a real thing. Yeah. Right? You just kind of gave an example in Judaism as well. But this was at a time where there was no question. If you do good things, you go to heaven. If you do bad things, you're going to hell. So him saying this in a book like this, was a gaspable moment for a lot of readers, where they would have been like,
because these readers are also probably to some extent biblical literalists in and of themselves.
Exactly.
So you're not discussing this with an audience of other people who think like Mark Twain.
Right.
That's actually a really interesting point.
Yeah. So very, very controversial, even in its own time. And we're going to talk about a little bit more of that in just a few minutes here too. But back to it, though, Mark Twain himself would say, quote, "American liberty began not in 1776, but in 1865, when slavery was abolished." Now, at this point in the story, inexplicably, Tom Sawyer arrives to aid Huck in liberating Jim. And what follows in the book has been scrutinized and debated over for a century and a half. So initially, Huck proposes a simple escape plan to free Jim. But Tom insists that the escape needs to be epic. So for 3 weeks, Jim remains a prisoner, while Tom and Huck try out various complicated schemes to free him. Now, when Jim is finally set free, Tom reveals that a few weeks prior, the widow Douglas had died and gave Jim his freedom in her will.
No.
So Jim was free the whole time. Now, again, lots of different ways you can interpret this. I personally think this was Mark Twain's way of basically saying change is not that simple. It takes work and time, and other people can still affect you. But you can all draw your own conclusions. Many other scholars have throughout the years. Regardless, though, the book has been recognized since its publication as one of the single most important pieces of anti-racist literature ever written. But even that sentiment has shifted at different points in time. At the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, the book was scorned by activists for its use of the N-word and these stereotypical depictions of Jim. In 1982, a school in Virginia banned the book, calling it the most grotesque example of racism I've ever seen in my life. In the 2000s, several schools in Washington tried to have the book banned due to the N-word being used. And in 2016, a public school district in Virginia banned both Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird for the same reason. Yeah. And I do have to say, everybody, I don't like to necessarily criminalize people for a lot of things, but if you read To Kill a Mockingbird and all you got out of it was they use the N-word, this book is racist, you did not read the book.
Yeah.
Anybody that used that word in the book were the villains. That's the whole point of the book. Yeah. And the heroes were like literally Atticus Finch, his whole thing is being like, I am going to stand up to the entire town who is trying to kill this man who is wrongfully accused of murder just because he's black. I'm going to do that in defiance of all of you because I don't believe that.
Yeah. I think I think you kind of touched on an interesting point here, and it's something that I heard Hank Green talk about recently, reacting to some podcast that Howie Mandel was on, talking about moral relativism and how slavery was considered good back then and bad now and yada, yada, yada. But the point is, I think now in the modern context of a society that has generally not read the classics and generally doesn't understand the context of the classics, more people are afraid to be regarded as racist or be associated with things regarded as racist than they are actually genuinely aware of the mechanisms of racism. This is something that I explored a lot when I was, in college studying ethnic studies and all of this, which is like so many people, especially if you're a public figure, somebody in politics, so many people are much more afraid of being associated with this foggy cloud of an idea. And we'll talk a little bit about this actually in our next series, which touches on some spicy politics. There are these clouds of ideas here in America, right? What is a racist? What is a communist? What is a socialist?
Right.
And then there are the actual hard book definitions. And then there are all of these off branches, right? You can have a conservative say that they absolutely hate, let's say, communism. But when I get some money, I want me and my family to live in a compound and we all share all of our resources.
That's fair.
And we build our own roads and we make our own fences. And you're like, well, that is communism. And in the same way, the same thing happens with racism, where there's this cloudy, amorphous thing that is considered racism. And a lot of people know, obviously, that you should not say the N-word. It's an absolutely abhorrent thing to do. And a lot of people know that Mark Twain, being a product of his times, absolutely made some caricaturizing remarks about black people just based off of his experience, and they're uncalled for judgments, right? But they don't understand the context of the direction and the trajectory that Mark Twain's writing and ideas is shooting for. Exactly. Like where we started from versus what the conclusion of this book is, and realizing that it is a general upwards growth. Does
Correct.
Mark Twain have bad opinions about races? Absolutely, certainly.
Yes.
But does Mark Twain also try to make the thesis of multiple writings about how we shouldn't have those opinions?
Right. It is a growth
Absolutely,
process.
yes. You can't see your own unconscious biases. I shouldn't say that. You can't see all of your own unconscious biases, and Mark Twain is an example of that. But once again, we are too scared of being in that amorphous cloud that is X, in this case, racism, that we can't actually zoom in on that cloud and find the core of it, the hard definition of what racism means.
Exactly. And I will also say that for anybody out there who may happen to be a Mark Twain massive scholar, I didn't write it in necessarily because I was like, oh man, this is going to be a lot of words and everything. But like, even at the time when he wrote Huckleberry Finn, he wrote some, I would say, pretty insensitive things to his wife about black people. And it was more to do, and I'll give you the exact example of what this was. It was more to do when it came to voting rights. And his whole thing came down to, in his mind, okay, and again, this is not something I'm condoning, it's just what he was saying, is he was saying that, generally speaking, black people were not educated, so why should they be able to vote if they're not educated on how to vote, basically. Yes. And the way that he phrased it to his wife, Livy, was, I can't remember the exact verbiage of it, but it was something to the effect of saying like, black people are like this, so I can't make this happen or whatever, versus white people are like this, so they should be able to vote. And Livy responded by saying, well, then you assume everybody is white until they prove themselves to be black. Ooh. Not a great statement.
Not a great statement.
Don't like saying that even out loud myself, personally. That's pretty icky.
Yes.
But hopefully you can see even slightly beyond what she was trying to say. She was trying to associate with him of like going, the analogy being, okay, then assume everybody is smart until they prove themselves to be dumb. Now that is racist for her to say something like that too.
Of course, 100%.
But this is also 150 years ago. 10, 15 years out of the Civil War.
Yeah. And we're not necessarily like making an argument of moral relativism. Like it was bad being racist then. But the point that we're trying to make here is you have to look at the graph, right?
Right.
Look at the X and Y axis and the direction in which these people's thoughts and feelings were going. I would say like Mark Twain's opinion on voting rights for black folks would be what I would consider a moral blind spot in a person that is otherwise trying to go towards a trajectory of equality.
Yes.
Should he have addressed that? Absolutely. In the same way that so many people have so many biases that they need to currently address right now.
Correct. Now, I fear that if we dive into this anymore, people are going to be like, oh, get on with it. We get it.
We're getting lost in the weeds.
So
we'll continue.
I think you all get it. So we'll move on from here. So sorry.
Suffice it to say, very poignant and a really cool, thought-provoking part of the series.
Yes. Now, I will say, hopefully, and I wrote this, hopefully, I don't even have to say to all of our non-black listeners, don't say the N-word.
Could you imagine if we have a listener who's like, well, Mark Twain says it's all right, I'm free. You know, and they're just like, I've been waiting for this moment. Thank you, Daniel and Akiva. I appreciate this permission.
I know. But I do hope that everyone out there can at least understand that acceptable language shifts throughout history. For example, the word dumb originally referred to somebody without the ability to speak, hence the term deaf, dumb, and blind, like Helen Keller. They were not calling Helen Keller stupid. They were saying that she could not hear, speak, or see, right?
Yep.
Or an even more modern example, in the 1970s, what we would now refer to as the R word was considered the correct term for someone with any number of special needs or mental disabilities. Hell, even saying the term mental disability now is starting to go away, being replaced with neurodivergent. And I'm learning from my wife, who's a teacher, they're even starting to do away with neurodivergent and saying neurospicy. So, like, the goalpost does move when it comes to this kind of stuff. And in my personal opinion, calling Mark Twain a racist for using the N-word in the 1880s would be like calling a behavioral psychologist from the 70s an ableist for using the R word at the time.
That's actually a pretty good parallel.
I just don't...
I can get behind that. Yeah.
Right? Like, anyways, everybody, all I'm trying to say is that historical context is important and that language shifts. Okay?
We have to like come up with like a jingle for every time this happens in a series because it inevitably happens, like Da Vinci when we find out that his boyfriend is 15 or, you know, like Percy Shelley doing some terrible shit. We just have to get like a chime or something.
I know. But anyways, as for the critical reception of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, opinions were split. Many critics hated it, saying it was coarse and in bad taste, but that had nothing to do with the racial slurs being used.
I'm fine with that.
Honestly, right? And that was much like Tom Sawyer previously. They found the character of Huck Finn to be unsavory. But others knew what was up, with one newspaper calling Mark Twain the Edison of literature. In hindsight, they should have called him the Tesla of literature, but I am biased now. Thanks, Akiva.
You're welcome.
And this whole them saying he was the Edison of literature, this was in reference to the actual dialectic writing style Mark Twain had developed and put on full display in Huck Finn. Still others, like the Public Library of Massachusetts, banned the book, saying they wouldn't subject their patrons to its vile language and quote-unquote questionable morals.
All right.
The book banning then became national news, and when one of the library's board members was interviewed, he said, quote, "While I do not wish to state it as my opinion that the book is absolutely immoral in its tone, it contains but very little humor, and that little is a very coarse type. I regard it as the veriest trash."
Oh, I bet that guy's just a hoot at parties.
And never forget, everyone, much of the North was racist too. They were just mostly in favor of abolishing slavery.
Yes.
But as they say, any press is good press. And just about a month after it was published, Huckleberry Finn sold more than 43,000 copies and even bolstered the sales of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Sam was finally getting the payday he deserved for both of these books. And by the end of the 1800s, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn would be the third highest selling book of the century. Pretty sweet.
That's insane.
And if anybody's curious, the top three. First one was Uncle Tom's Cabin, which we mentioned in the past. Second one, I was a little surprised to hear this, Ben-Hur.
Huh.
Yeah. Number 3, Huckleberry Finn.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where's the Bible? Bible's always number one.
Always number one. We can't include the Bible. It's almost like not fair.
Yeah.
Like it's just anyways.
Gotcha.
Now, additionally, Ulysses S. Grant was now in full writing swing for his memoirs. Mark Twain, who had initially told Grant to begin writing, checked on the ailing general and ex-president often. By this time, Grant's throat cancer was so severe that he was in near constant pain and was barely able to sleep. But Grant found comfort in the writing process. At first, Sam really did just check in on Grant to keep him company and be a buddy. But after a few months, he started to read bits of his memoir and was a bit surprised to discover how good it actually was. Grant, as it turned out, was a natural author. He asked Grant if he could publish the book, but knowing Grant was in desperate need of money, Sam offered Grant an insane publishing deal, a 70% royalty.
Whoa.
Yeah. So Sam wanted to be rich, but he wasn't without a heart, as Grant was initially offered a 10% royalty from a different publisher.
Yeah, that basically he's like, oh, that just covers the cost of making the book and then the rest goes to you.
He still made money, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but Grant made a lot more money, at least is what we'll talk about. Okay,
yeah,
we'll get there. Now, Ulysses S. Grant would pass away in July of 1885, just 5 days after submitting the final manuscript of his memoirs. When his memoirs were ready for print, Sam dreamt up a sales tactic where Civil War veterans would go door to door to pitch the book.
That's cool.
So, like, Civil War veterans would knock and be like, man, we're just trying to get, book sales up for General Grant because, he needs the money and his wife needs the money. And they were like, sign me up. Like, no problem. I mean, this is a national hero.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And this was actually an amazing idea, as before the books were even released, it was 2 parts, it was 2 volumes, buckle up, 350,000 orders had been placed.
That's like all of the United States population at this time.
Even Uncle Tom's Cabin hadn't sold that many in the first year.
Wow.
Huge number. Within 3 years of publication, Grant's widow would receive $450,000 in royalties. That is roughly $15.7 million in today's currency.
Wow.
And Sam would make a cool $200,000, roughly $6.7 million in today's currency.
Nice.
Cleaned up, dude.
Yeah.
It was a good one. As for Sam's family, we haven't talked about them much this episode. Things were actually going really great. Livy was still the love of his life, and all 3 of his daughters were growing like weeds. Susie, who was now 13 years old, had a special bond with her father and was even secretly writing something of a biography about him, highlighting his good nature and talents as a writer. Sam would later discover her writings, which he cherished in a way that he couldn't fully put into words. Susie would write, quote, "We are a very happy family. We consist of Papa, Mama, Jean, Clara, and me. It is Papa I am writing about. He is a very good man and a very funny one. He has got a temper, but we all of us have in this family. He is the loveliest man I ever saw and ever hope to see, and oh so absent-minded." She was a chip off the old block, which is probably why she was Sam's favorite. And it was sort of like an open secret that she was like his favorite, his oldest daughter.
Oh man, if I read that as a parent, I would tear up immediately.
Right. He literally would hold on to it and just like read it randomly because it made him just so happy.
It's almost making me misty-eyed just think, like, if I like had a kid who I found out was like secretly hanging out in the shop and like making something, and I discovered that, I'd be like, yes, you like knife making? We can do that all day if you want. Yeah. We can do that all the time. Yeah. Like I'm sure there was like a part of him who was like, I need this. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And he loved it. He was so happy.
That's great.
Now, as winter arrived, Sam turned 50 years old, and he was amazed to think that just 20 years ago, he was obscure, alone, and damn near penniless in San Francisco, so much so that he had contemplated suicide.
Incredible.
He was now the most famous and highest paid author in the United States. Ooh,
that's crazy.
Gives me the tingles, man. As the new year arrived, he was running under the idea that he was more or less done as an author, save for one final book. He had recently started dreaming up a story about a modern man from Connecticut who one day woke up in medieval times, but hadn't fleshed much of it out. So after some encouragement from a friend, He started to write it, though like many of his writing projects, it would take years to be completed. For now, he would continue to pursue his investments, in particular, the page typesetting machine. Keep this in your mind, everybody. The page typesetting machine, which would continue to leech money from him and provide no return on investment. And after the success of publishing Grant's memoirs, he started looking for other publishing prospects and signed a deal to publish the biography of Pope Leo XIII.
Huh.
He figured every good Catholic would be obliged to purchase a copy, but he probably hadn't met too many Catholics. Should I take that out? I feel like somebody's getting mad at me for saying that. I'm joking, people. Give me a break, okay? I'm just poking fun. Like, don't write me letters. Still, the deal was signed and his company would publish the book, but it would be a commercial failure. And of the failure, Mark Twain would say, quote, "We did not consider how often Catholics could not read, and how often when they could, they did not wish to read."
Oh my God. Wow. You two would get along swimmingly.
Dude, he's like my spirit animal now. Anyways, in regards to his next literary work, Sam was in a bit of a dry spell. His metaphorical tank had run dry. But then, in February of 1887, a review of Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs was published from an English newspaper. Sam was outraged to read that essentially they didn't like it because the writing wasn't up to snuff for English standards. In direct retaliation, Sam would say, quote, "What do we care for grammar when we think of those thunderous phrases, unconditional and immediate surrender? I propose to move immediately upon your works. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. When we think of General Grant, our pulses quicken and his grammar vanishes." It was just the fire he needed to resume work on his time travel book. The book in many ways was taking direct aim at English society, with the main character, Hank Morgan, an engineer, being transported to the time of King Arthur and teaching everyone about advancements in technology and government. Knights would ditch their horses in favor of bicycles. The wizard Merlin would be exposed as a fraud, and eventually the nation would give the monarchy the boot and replace them with democracy. The book concludes, however, on a much darker note, as the Yankees' innovations end up bringing the kingdom of Camelot to utter ruin after a massive war erupts, with knights now being equipped with landmines, electric wire, Gatling guns, and dynamite, which results in the slaughter of 30,000 men in one single battle. This scene in the novel is gruesomely described, with Mark Twain writing, quote, "We could not count the dead because they did not exist as individuals, but merely as homogeneous protoplasm with alloys of iron and buttons."
Whoa.
Now, interpretations vary on this book, but one of my favorites is the idea that the book is an analogy for the antiquated quote-unquote church, i.e. England, being no match for the quote-unquote machine, i.e. America. The book, as many of you probably already know, would eventually be titled A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and would not only be one of the first books ever written about time travel, but also the first American science fiction novel and the earliest known example of a alternative history book.
That's kind of sick.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
And there's this whole debate about who wrote the first time travel novel. And it really comes down to publishing times, because he thought about this like 2 years prior. And then like a year after he thought of it, a book was published about actual time travel.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole thing of like, well, was he the first? Well, not technically, but maybe he was the first to think about it, but maybe he wasn't. Like, it's just this very wishy-washy, like, we don't really know.
I can't remember if we discussed this in the last episode, but I think it's interesting that it took so long for us to come up with time travel. And my sort of theory as to why this wasn't like a popular notion for a long time was the fact that time was not this linear trajectory upwards in advancement for almost all of human history. Like if you were a farmer from 1450, living in Florence, Italy, you had the same technology as a farmer from 2000 BC, with the exception that maybe instead of bronze, your tools were iron or steel.
True.
Versus, in his time, it feels like time is this other third concept, besides, space and whatever. But you know what I'm saying?
Totally.
Like, it's so cool.
Totally. But yeah, it's just amazing that this book, and I was especially amazed to learn that it was the first alternative history, which you can kind of align with things like steampunk, right?
Yeah.
The idea that history took a turn at a point where we went straight, and then you have this alternative steampunk history.
Or like Fallout, that sort of thing.
So Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court was like, well, what if knights were given bicycles back then? And what if we were able to replace people like Merlin with actual logic and science? Like, it's this shift in how you see how this history played out.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So he was the first guy to do that.
That's sick.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And Akiva, you have drawn the comparison several times in the past that Mark Twain is basically Bugs Bunny. Wouldn't you know it, in 1978, Warner Brothers would make a cartoon called A Connecticut Rabbit in King Arthur's Court, starring A1, Bugs Bunny.
That's hilarious. I love that. I love that so much.
I knew you would, which is why I wrote it in. But there was no book in progress that could put his other anxieties to rest. By this point, none of his investments, save for the Ulysses S. Grant memoirs, had paid off, and his bank account was beginning to run low. Despite this, however, he continued to bleed money into his investments, continued to travel around the East Coast to give speeches, lobbied to Congress for copyright protections for authors, and when in New York, stopped by the legendary restaurant Delmonico's for a fancy bite to eat.
Yo! I think everybody, maybe not everybody remembers, but Delmonico's was the haunt of like every socialite.
High society in New York.
It was essentially the first Escoffier restaurant. If you don't know Escoffier, he was like the premier French culinarian at the time. It was the first Escoffier restaurant to come to America. And famous people such as Nikola Tesla loved going there. And we had a whole thing in one episode of Nikola Tesla about his extremely weird and picky eating habits at Delmonico's.
Yep. And I even wrote this in, though there is no evidence to support this, it is possible that during one of these dinners, Mark Twain first spotted Nikola Tesla, but we will get there later.
Yes.
All right. Now, Sam's publishing house, Charles L. Webster & Co., was in dire straits, and by early 1889, the company had exactly $859.18 in the bank.
Ooh.
It's about $30,000 in today's currency. Additionally, Sam continued to pour money into the Page typesetting machine as he continued to believe it would revolutionize the world of printing, but it did not. Spoiler. Now, on the personal side of things, the Clemens family was doing mostly well, except for Sam and Livy's brother-in-law, Theodore, who had had a massive stroke and was now mostly bedridden. Now, you'll remember Theodore because I think it was the last episode, if not the one before, we talked about this place called Quarry Farm.
Yes.
And they had built this basically summer house for Sam to go sit in and write at the top of this beautiful hill that overlooked a river and everything like that. That was Theodore and his wife, Susan. They did that for them. Literally every single summer, they would spend like 2 or 3 months at this Quarry Farm place with them. It was where he met Marianne Cord.
Oh, yeah, right? yeah.
So it's this really significant place, really significant, really great people, Susan and Theodore Crane. Very enlightened people for their time. So their annual summer stay at Quarry Farm that was usually so filled with joy now had a dark cloud looming overhead as Theodore Crane inched ever closer to death. On July 3rd, 1889, Sam and Livy's brother-in-law, Theodore Crane, passed away at 58. In the past, Sam had always found death to be a logical and emotional step away from his belief in a god, but this death seemed to have struck him a little differently. Sam was now 53, just 5 years younger than his brother-in-law, and his mortality was starting to become more apparent. He would write to Livy around this time saying, quote, "We do not see and feel the power of what we call God. We do see it and feel it in such measureless fullness that we ought to infer not justice and goodness from that, but from another thing, namely, the fact that there is a large element of justice and goodness in his creature, man. And we may also infer that he has in him injustice, and ungoodness because he has put those into man too. Now, I am privileged to infer that there is far more goodness than ungoodness in man. For if it were not so, man would have exterminated himself before this. I detest man, but nevertheless, this is true of him. The God that I fear is the caricature of him which one finds in the Bible. Kind of rad, right?
Yeah.
Kind of rad.
I feel like a lot of people who feel a sense of spirituality these days, especially here in the U.S., tend to lean towards the idea of this collective goodness, sort of standing in place for that hope for that light in the distance, right? The fact that everybody is inherently good, I feel like, is a soothing thought to people like Mark Twain, who, you know, might not necessarily believe in the dude with the robes and the cloud. Right?
Yeah, and it's like Pete Holmes, many people know, is one of my favorite comedians. Hopefully he's one of yours too. He's hilarious.
Yeah, he's great.
He quotes somebody else who actually was the road manager for AC/DC. Apparently, like, he read his book or whatever. But Pete Holmes has kind of taken this quote, and the way that guy described it is he said, "God is the name of the blanket that we put over the mystery."
Yeah, and it seems like Mark Twain kind of has that sentiment, the God of the gaps.
Right.
Sort of
is
thing.
this sort of like, you know, again, at the very end, he says, the God that I fear is the caricature of him which one finds in the Bible. Right. So I think, in other words, he's kind of saying that it's the opposite is also true, where he's like, that caricature I don't really like, but the idea of man representing things that were given by a creator, namely being justice and goodness.
Yeah.
That I like.
Yeah.
You know, kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
I love that.
However, his cynicism could not be withheld, and he would write to his sister around the same time saying, quote, "I love you and I'm sorry for every time I have ever hurt you. But God Almighty knows I should keep on hurting you just the same, for I am built so, being made merely in the image of God, but not otherwise resembling him enough to be mistaken for him by anybody but a very nearsighted person." Just good wit.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, by August, Sam was receiving proofs of A Connecticut Yankee and loved the result. It was his most audacious and merciless book yet. To him, it was punk rock. He was sticking it to the man. His middle finger was raised, and at the time, he believed it was going to be his final offering to the gods of literature, his not-so-fond farewell, as it were. According to critics, the book was doing its job exactly. American critics praised it, with Harper's Monthly saying, quote, "Here he is to the full, the humorist. But he is very much more, and his strong, indignant, often infuriate hate of injustice and his love of equality burn hot through the manifold adventures and experiences of this tale. At every moment the scene amuses, but it is all the time an object lesson in democracy. It makes us glad of our republic and our epic. The novel is always true to human nature, the only truth possible, the only truth essential to fiction." Sweet. Across the pond,
Yep.
English critics hated it, with various newspapers calling it deplorable and a huge colossus of a joke, not in a flattering way. But despite its praise and controversy, it was, once again, not a huge success, and only sold 24,000 copies in the first 6 months. Consumers just didn't buy the idea that tens of thousands of people could be mechanically slaughtered on a battlefield. Little did they all know that in less than 25 years, Mark Twain's novel, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, would prove to be eerily prophetic.
That's true.
We're not far out from World War I.
Oh, yeah. What year are we in right now?
We are in 1887.
Oh, yeah. We're getting close.
Yeah, dude.
Things are boiling.
And as a little teeny spoiler in the next episode, there's a point that he actually meets Kaiser Wilhelm, who led Germany into World War I.
Whoa.
Yeah, dude. It's wild. We'll get there, though. But as of 1889, so it was actually 1888. Now we're into, 1889. 1889 gave way to 1890. Sam's once relative fortune was all but gone. He had sunk more than $150,000, roughly $5.2 million, into the page typesetting machine, which
Bro,
still wasn't ready.
drop it. Let it go, man.
And his extravagant lifestyle was finally catching up with him. Nothing seemed to be going the way he had planned, and he was starting to get desperate. He could no longer afford to keep up his house in Hartford with its large staff and near constant social gatherings, so he needed to find an alternative. Additionally, Livy, who was chronically prone to illness, was now being diagnosed with heart strain, and her doctor recommended going to Europe, as he said the gentle climates and mineral baths would help, which was at the time, mineral baths were like the cure-all.
Yes.
Like, if anything was wrong with you, they're like, well, you know, those mineral baths, they're really seeing some results there. And I think really what it came down to was like, yeah, you just sit in a warm environment for a while and you're going to feel better.
Yes.
Like, it's very little to do with minerals absorbing into you or anything. Anyways, bingo, Sam thought. They would all pack up and go to Europe. The American dollar would go way further in Europe, which is where he could do a little bit of time to regroup and find sturdy footing financially. But before any serious European plans could be made, a few other events would stir their emotional pot. In August, Sam and Livy would receive communication that both of their mothers were seriously ill.
Oh, no.
Sam's mother, Jane, had suffered a stroke, so he rushed off to Iowa to be with her. She hung on long enough for Sam to say his goodbyes and head back home, but on October 27th, 1890, she would pass away at the age of 87.
Not bad.
Not bad.
That's pretty good for that time, too.
Pretty damn good for the time. Jane Clemens would be buried back in Hannibal next to her husband, Marshall, and her son, Henry. Livy's mother would survive for a bit longer, but in late November, they would receive word that she, too, wouldn't make it much longer. Sam and Livy would head to Elmira to be with her, but when it rains, it pours. And just as they arrived, they received word that their youngest daughter, Jean, had fallen seriously ill as well, having epileptic seizures. So Sam rushed back home to be with her. Sam would write to his friend William Dean Howells saying, quote, I ought to be there at the Langdon house, but Jean pleads to not be wholly forsaken. So when the death telegram falls, I shall stay with Jean and send Susie and Clara to their mother. I have fed so full on sorrow these last weeks that I seem to have become hardened to them, benumbed. The very next day, Livy's mother, Olivia Lewis Langdon, would pass away at the age of 80. It was a sign of things to come, as the last 20 years of Sam Clemens' life would be riddled with hardship, tragedy, and heartache. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 9 of Mark Twain.
Ooh, interesting. Because normally when we get to the decline, we got like one episode through, but it seems like we still have some more meat to chew.
We do. And I had debated accelerating through a lot of this, but you'll see in the next episode, there's a lot more story to tell. And then the conclusion episode, like we always do, not only is it going to give us time to wrap it all up, but it'll also give me a little bit extra time to talk about impact of Mark Twain, adaptations of Mark Twain, inspiration for other stories, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, look, I think hopefully y'all can see already, we've talked about so many things that this guy did first ever, right? Yeah. And contributed to the world that it's to me, it just felt like a disservice to be like, well, yada, yada. It's like, witnessing, and a little bit of a spoiler, is like part 9 is so much of it is going to be about financial troubles, right? So kind of watching somebody who's really successful and then squander away a big fortune too, and then other things happen. It's a part of the story too, you know? And I promise it's not just gonna be a bunch of boring numbers or whatever. There's a lot more to the next episode just than that type of stuff. Yeah. And then there's also going to be some extra like, oh, but then this thing happens and this is good. And then that, like, it ebbs and flows.
Still got some more stuff to get through.
There is a lot more stuff to get through, but it is good. I promise you. And I think we got through this episode actually in a relatively good time. I was worried because I was like, there's a lot of content here.
No, we did great. This was great.
Cool. Well, yeah. And so again, and also hopefully y'all can see why we spent probably 20 minutes or so at least talking about Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
Because it is one of those where full reality here. The reason that I initially chose Mark Twain is it was, whatever it was, 8 months ago or something. I was watching Netflix. I was looking for something to watch, and I saw they had put the Conan O'Brien Mark Twain Award acceptance on there. And I went, Conan's like my favorite. Gotta watch Conan's acceptance thing. And I watched it. And not only did Conan O'Brien give one of Mark Twain's quotes, which was this one about how, one of the greatest pieces of comedy in history basically is that, the white man's notion that they are less savage than the other savages, which is really just to say, like, throughout history, white men were sitting there going like, these are the savages over there while decimating populations. Yes. You know what I mean? It's a joke. It's ridiculous. And he said that, and I went, oh man, maybe I should do Mark Twain. And earlier in the episode, or not in that episode, it was the one with Dave Chappelle, Colin Jost, who does the weekend update for SNL. Yeah. He gets on there and it's hilarious. And he does the delivery much better than I can, but he goes up there and he goes, so everybody knows we're here to give away the Mark Twain prize. Mark Twain, of course, being known most famously for his book Huckleberry Finn, which is the adventures of a lovable rapscallion who joins up with an ex-slave named Jim, or as Huck would call him. And then he just pauses, and it's hilarious. Yes. And I went, okay, I got to know more about this. Like, yeah, because it seems to be this very interesting juxtaposition where he's making this joke, and then Conan O'Brien is coming up here and saying
this very profound thing he's very about social justice.
The case, right? Yes. And that was where it all kind of came from. Is me just being like, well, damn, now I got to know, because I feel like I was aware of him. I had to read things like Tom Sawyer and stuff when I was growing up, so I think, I know Mark Twain, and then I went, I don't really know much about this guy at all. I'm very curious now to know what his story was. Yeah. And I got to say, it's been my favorite story that I've ever done research on for the show here. So
this is definitely one of my favorite series by far. Yeah. I maybe my favorite. If I wrote it, of course, I would think it's my favorite because I'm an egoist and I love my own writing. But it's got to be one of the best we've ever done, man.
Yeah, well, I really do appreciate that, because it's, with all of our series, it takes a long time. It's a lot of work to get this stuff done. It takes a lot of time.
Y'all don't get it. Y'all don't get it. I know some of you out here, and I'm calling out my sister, some of y'all just like put us on there to go to sleep, and I appreciate it. We enjoy the views, but you don't realize how much sweat per word there is to making these series.
I legitimately, and it luckily it kind of ebbs and flows when we're switching out series between you and I. So you take a shift and I take a shift and blah, 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 blah. But when I'm in full swing, I will spend basically all of Saturday and Sunday just reading and writing. And same thing. My wife, Kat, has said to me several times that she's just like, dude, like I kind of miss you. Like all weekend you're doing this work. And I'm like, babe, I know, and I'm really sorry. And so I do try to make it up in ways like we'll go out to date nights, and I'll have a hard cutoff time of being like, I'm done by 4, so that I actually have time to go and do extra things she wants me to do around the house and be with her and all this kind of stuff. But just that you all know, it is
I know exactly what you mean. Because also for the people in our lives, they see it as an interesting and very cool hobby. And it's hard to explain to certain people, like, I have to do this. Like, this is a thing that I'm compelled to do, even if it's not a job. And especially, here in the US or wherever, really, it's hard to validate this level of effort for something that you're not necessarily getting paid for.
I agree. But
it's just, it's so, especially when you're on somebody like Mark Twain, or when I was doing Tesla or Da Vinci, when it's somebody that you can just tear through, it's like, oh my God, yes, it's killing me and I'm losing my mind over it, but I can't wait to get back in the office, and I can't wait to keep reading and writing.
And it's also one of those, and I know you've experienced this too, Akiva, of like, I'm constantly surprised at how much stuff I don't know.
Yeah. Like we just walk around and we sit in our car that's made by some random Slavic dude that we didn't even know about, or at least parts of it are. And then we're, listening to our favorite comedy shows, and so much of the form and factor is, designed by this guy who died 100 years ago. Yeah. Like a great point. Hardcore History, what's his name? Dan Carlin. Talks about the hardest part for him to tell a story is figuring out when to start it, because the gears of history continue to turn even when you're not looking at them. Yep. Like our coins are Roman, right? We use there's so many things that we're like, oh, when did this stop? It didn't.
Right. And it's not even just that.
That's
It's like, well, we're going to get into it in the next episode, but I got into this piece of American history that I was like, oh, I thought I knew what this was.
Yeah.
And I didn't. And I feel like I've continued to learn that even throughout this series, but every single series that I do. I mean, I think one of the best things for me was going through the story of the Mexican Revolution with Pancho Villa and just being like, how did I not know that, like, I mean, we think of the Roaring 20s and it was like, dude, the Mexican Revolution just wrapped up in 1920, basically. And I never even knew that.
Our like, next door neighbors are only 100 years old, basically.
Their constitution.
Their
government exactly.
Right.
And I am constantly continuing to learn that. And it just illuminates so much
context,
about the world around me and the world that we live in. And it was like, I read that quote in the last episode from Paul Giamatti of like, if you want to understand the present, you got to start in the past. And I continuously learn this throughout reading it. And it's one of the things, researching, I should say, one of the things that I love and continue to come back to doing this for is because I love having this ability to, you know, when somebody says something like, oh, you know, this thing right now is really sucky. And I can go, so if you rewind the clock 150 years, there was actually this thing that happened where, and you can actually trace these points back to things.
Yeah.
And go, this is actually where it started and why. And the context of it is this. And like,
and it makes life like richer.
It does.
It makes the things that you're upset about even more upsetting because you know how long we've been struggling with it. And it makes the things that you didn't think you could possibly be grateful for, you're 10 times more grateful. I can't tell you how many times I like sit in my car or I'm doing a thing at work and I'm like, thank you, Nikola Tesla. Thank you, Da Vinci.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark Twain.
Yeah.
Because it's like, my life would not exist without this context. It's great. It's great.
Completely agree. And and you know, like I've said this before in the series already, but like for me being I love the yucks, you know what I mean? I love comedy in many, many forms. And it's amazing. Like I was, you know, poor Kat, like I'll tell her these things and she's such a good sport and she'll be like, oh, that's interesting. You know,
she'll into too.
But like, you know, I was telling her about how like an episode or two ago, Mark Twain basically invented the roast. And so it's just sort of an amazing thought to think that whatever it was within the past year, the roast of Tom Brady was at this arena and it had all these different comics and Kevin Hart hosted it. And I was like, you can quite literally draw a line from this event to Mark Twain roasting some authors back in the 1800s. Dude.
Yep.
I love that. Like that kind of stuff.
It's such a high.
Oh my gosh, man. Gives me so much joy. And I continue to learn that stuff with Mark Twain of like, oh, he would do this and he would do that. And then he wrote this. And even learning about things like the Connecticut Yankee, where it was like, wait, first American science fiction novel, one of the first 2 or 3 books about time travel, and the first book ever about an alternative history. That's a grand slam right there, dude.
Yeah, man.
Of literature. And it's amazing that we can see this book and
it's also like crazy to like be like, oh, this is the first time our brains went down this path.
Yeah.
Right? Like same with like Tesla with like anytime I think of anybody, I don't know, getting saved in a hospital or using a tool or doing this, that, or the other, it's like, oh, electromagnetism, that was a brain pathway that engineers could not explore until in part Edison and mostly Tesla went and explored it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, and same thing with Mark Twain. It's like, oh, we just didn't think about other worlds. I don't know, series, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons might not have been a thing, or at least might not have happened at the right time in the right place for our reality to exist if it wasn't for Mark Twain.
Exactly.
So weird.
And I don't know. I hope that y'all get the same amount of joy out of this that we do, because it is just like, I don't know. It's funny too, because people have asked me if I've always been a history person. No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I think there have been pockets of history that I've been very interested in, but I've never been like a history dork. And then one day I just sort of decided this would be a good idea. And now I'm like a total history dork, where I love these kinds of
I did not know
facts.
that about you. I've always been a history nerd since I was a kid.
I mean, look, like I think...
Like I watched the History Channel instead of Disney when I was like 5, and people thought it was
quote unquote history.
Well,
on the
yeah,
History Channel.
okay. There was still a couple of valid.
And by the way, the pyramids, aliens.
Yeah, there were still some shows about. It was basically the World War II channel when I was a kid, and then it became bullshit.
No, and again, I think like all stereotypical boys, right? It's like, oh, World War II is cool. World War I is not as cool, but I guess it's kind of interesting sometimes. And then knights are really cool. And like, you know what I mean? There are those types of things that you get interested in. But like, we've had this conversation when you talked about Alexander Dumas, where you were like, I never would have thought I'd been interested about the French Revolution. And it is one of the coolest pieces of history.
About the Enlightenment era until...
And then you get into it and you go like, dude, this is metal. Like, this is so actually radical. Like, you think of the frilly outfits, but when you go beyond that, it's like, dude, this is hardcore.
Like, yeah, maybe they were wearing stockings, but these dudes were tearing each other apart. They were visionaries and poets and romantics, and it's great.
And that's what I'm saying, is that, like, again, it's like every one of these pockets of history that I decide to keep diving into, I am continuously amazed by how cool it actually is and how enlightening it all is.
That's why it makes me mad too, like, people not liking history, because it's like, do you like gossip? Do you like technology? Do you like drama? Then you like history. Like, if I was like, oh, so my friend Alex, he did this, that, and the other, and I didn't tell you that it happened 200 years ago, you might think that story's awesome.
Well, and I think, we've already talked about this. I think in the episode or two ago, one of our listeners that emailed us, professor of neuroscience, PhD of neuroscience, and reached out to us and said, I never liked history, but seeing it through the eyes of an individual, it's actually fascinating. And now I'm kind of obsessed with it. And I could not agree more. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many people are not interested in history, is that if you just give them a wall of events,
they did
it's just
this
sort of like,
they did that.
Okay, whatever. Okay, a ship sank and blah, 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 blah. Who cares? But when you go, there was actually this one person who did this one thing. And I keep thinking back, by the way, to Mabel Dodge Luhan, the first series we ever did. Mabel Dodge Luhan was born in like 1882. So just about 10 years prior to the end of this episode.
Interesting.
So when you think about that age, and especially if you've ever watched the show The Gilded Age, if you've seen it before.
Yep.
She was born into that. And by the end of her life, was married to a Native American man living in the deserts of New Mexico.
Weird.
What an unbelievable thing life is, right? Where it can take you and how things change. She died in the 60s. Imagine being born into the Gilded Age.
And then dying when the Beatles are rocking out.
50s, pardon me. Early 50s. But even so, you're in the age of poodle skirts. You lived through World War II and World War I. Like,
what is going on with your life?
Watching the world transform in that way, and again through the eyes of this one specific person. Anyway, we got to stop because it's going to go on for too long. But it is.
We're turning into a regular podcast and not a biographer's podcast.
Stuff. Sorry, everybody. So we'll wrap it up here.
Okay.
Hope y'all enjoyed the episode. Again, we're going to take a quick break before the New Year's, just to be with our families and all that good stuff for the holiday season. But again, we're going to be putting that full series of Queen Victoria up on YouTube for your listening pleasure. We have 2 more episodes to go. Episode 9 and 10 of Mark Twain. It's going to be good. Bring out a box of tissues for sadness.
Deal.
There is going to be some sadness, but it is good. So yeah, hope y'all enjoyed. Like always, a couple of extra things. Again, if you want to support us, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. For any questions, comments, corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. You can leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you're feeling generous as well.
Love talking to you guys.
Yeah. Shoot us an email, even if you're just trying to say, hey, and what's up?
And I haven't been very good with the whole emailing thing. Daniel's been fielding all the questions, but I'm going to hop on it. And if you have questions about any of my series, I'm going to try to be a little bit more talkative because I love hearing from you guys. It's great.
Yeah, it's super fun. We really enjoy it. So yeah, please continue to do that. Again, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. And then any metal things happening, Akiva.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you saw the post earlier. When is this episode coming out?
It'll be on this coming Friday.
Okay. So we will have just enough time. I am trying to do a shop clearing sale. I have just a handful of knives that I made for a show a while ago, and they've kind of been sitting for a while, and I want a new welder, a couple of new things, trying to get it all before this, financial or fiscal year, as they say, ends. So I'm doing a fat discount on all of my knives. I'm doing 30% off. As I realized that it may have been too much of a discount because the second I did it, 5 knives immediately sold that I've been sitting on for like a couple of months. But you know what? Screw it. I'm putting it up there. I want to get a new welder and a couple of new things. So if you hop on metalworkbymeola.com, you'll see that we got a big fat discount. If you listen to this episode a little bit later, use the code biographers and you'll still get 10% off, which for some of those nicer Damascus knives is a huge savings.
Totally.
But the sale ends when the ball drops on New Year's Eve. And if you do order before New Year's, there is a slight chance that one of those knives that I made as a demonstration in one of my classes, a little bushcraft knife or folding knife, this, that, or the other, might find its way into one of your packages.
Ooh,
so,
fancy.
metalworkbymeola.com, check out the discounts that we have until New Year's. If not, biographers for 10% off. And if you want to take a class, good luck. We are completely filled out right now.
Really?
Yeah. We had a mind-boggling amount of gift cards ordered this last season, during like Black Friday and all of that. But check out Hardy and Fuller here in Denver. I would love to meet some listeners. If you guys want to hop into a class, learn a little bit about knife making, and you're in the Denver area and Colorado in general, come to Hardy and Fuller.
Awesome. And you might meet some fans tonight, by the way.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because we're going to Daniel's trivia thing.
Yeah, I host trivia at a place called Chipper's Lanes in Broomfield. If you're in the Denver area, that's every single Tuesday night. So if you want to meet me, if you want to do some trivia and have some fun, even do a little bowling, you can do that as well. But anyway, that's just a silly little fun thing that I do to get out of the house. So, yay. All right. We'll leave y'all there. Thanks again for listening. Have a great holiday season, everybody. We'll see you in the new year. And do remember, like always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge, and I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.